Great. Well, I know we've been chatting, but good evening. Hello, I'm Kate Gertner. I'm Executive Director of Alpha Sigma Nu. And this evening, I'm very happy to introduce Eric Clayton and Brenna Davis to speak on the second of our three-part Lenten series on prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. On April 5th, Carrie Weber, Executive Director for America Magazine, will help us explore the Lenten theme of almsgiving and how to give alms in 2022. This evening, Eric and Brenna will speak on fasting towards freedom. Let me tell you a little bit about Eric and Brenna. Eric is the Deputy Director of Communications at the Jesuit Conference. I always forget, got to say Canada first, Jesuit Conference of Canada and the United States. He joined the team in 2019 and produces content that shares the wide-ranging impact and potential of Ignatian spirituality. He also guest hosts AMDG, a Jesuit podcast. He is the author of Cannonball Moments, Telling Your Story, Deepening Your Faith. And his writing has also appeared in Busted Halo, Amendo, Sojourners, Grotto Network, and Give Us This Day. Eric has a BA in Creative Writing and International Studies from Fairfield University and an MA in International Media from American University. He lives in Baltimore, Maryland, with his wife and two daughters. Brenna Davis serves as the Director of Education for Justice and Environmental Initiatives for the Ignatian Solidarity Network. If you don't already follow ISN on their website and social media, tune in. They always accomplish so much. Our folks in our office are amazed. Brenna is a certified spiritual director, and she serves on the boards of the Jesuit Retreat Center in Cleveland, Ohio, and for Bethlehem Farm in West Virginia. And she's a member of National Catholic Reporters Earthbeat Advisory Panel. So Brenna holds a bachelor's degree from Boston College, and she is an FJV, that is a former Jesuit volunteer. In her spare time, she enjoys reading, running, bullet journaling, speaking Spanish, and digging through trash cans to properly sort recycling. Eric and Brenna, we're delighted to have you with us, and thank you for your time, wisdom, and inspiration that you're going to be sharing with us this evening as ASN members get ready for Easter.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. We'll see about the wisdom and inspiration, but I'll do my best. I won't speak for Brenna. It's good to be with everybody. It's so funny speaking and not seeing people, but I will trust that you were there. And I'm also going to share my screen. Let's see. So you should be able to see that slide with my face on it. Is that true? All right. Okay. So let me get my screens are all out of whack now. So we're here to talk about fasting, right? Obviously, that's clear to everybody. And I think we have some very clear images in our mind when it comes to fasting, right? Where we think about, giving up stuff, chocolate, social media, hot showers. There's always kind of some self-inflicted wound that seems to come with fasting. So this idea of fasting towards freedom, which is our theme for tonight, might feel a little peculiar. So for many years, I was paid to think about fasting. I worked at Catholic Relief Services, and I worked on the CRS Rice Bowl program. And the program was simple. If you're familiar with Rice Bowl, you know it, right? It's built on these three Lenten pillars that we're talking about over the series: prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. And the idea is throughout the weeks of Lent, you read these different stories that motivate you to care about, right? To act in solidarity for folks around the world who are a little bit more vulnerable and left on the margins. And it's this idea that, what you give up for Lent is going to have an impact on other people. And so we spent so many meetings, thinking about how to frame that. How can we get people to say, hey, if I don't drink Starbucks, I can put that money in my box, and this can have some literal impact on people's lives. And I'm thinking about all these marketing meetings we had to really think about something very, very obvious, very simple, very ancient. The idea that fasting necessarily leads us into relationship. Fasting frees us for relationship, to look anew at relationships. And I think one of the best years, one of the most exciting times I was at for Rice Bowl, we talked about fasting and Lent in general as something that helps us think about how we relate to ourselves, to our neighbor, to creation, and to our God, right? So how can fasting free us for relationship? There's two pieces of scripture that I know you're familiar with because they're always part of Lent. And I'll read them to you now, right? So the first one comes from Isaiah. Is this not rather the fasting that I choose, releasing those bound unjustly, untying the thongs of the yoke, setting free the oppressed, breaking off every yoke? Is it not sharing your bread with the hungry, bringing the afflicted and the homeless into your house, clothing the naked when you see them, and not turning your back on your own flesh? And the second from Philippians. Rather, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, coming in human likeness, and found in human appearance. He humbled himself, becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. So in both of these passages, we see an upsetting of the status quo, a reordering of relationships, a setting aside of me, of the stuff of my needs, in favor of something else, something that benefits all of us, benefits the common good, that brings us into God's vision, right? No one is left without a home or without food, and the very God of the universe enters into relationship with the creation. So, back to the rice bowl, right? That can begin with putting a few coffee quarters into a cardboard box. My daughter upstairs just an hour ago was chasing down plants in the house to count them up for the how many quarters she had to owe the rice bowl today. But I think that's a beginning. That's a strengthening of a muscle, right? It doesn't end there. The storytelling and the marketing doesn't end there, because it's the same way like when you're working out, right? You're strengthening those muscles. You might look a sweaty mess, but you're building yourself up. You're getting stronger. And it's not about the appearance, it's about the purpose, the why, right? The question, of course, is when you're working out, stronger for what? For whom? That's the same question, I think, when we're talking about fasting and all the Lenten pillars, to be honest, right? Fasting isn't about begging or about self-deprecation, though it might look that way at times. It might have components of that. Fasting, rather, is about mission and vision and welcoming everybody, right, into this great endeavor of God, recognizing that we can't do it alone. Again, fasting to be free for and available for relationships. Therein lies the freedom we're looking towards, right? We prepare ourselves to be available to respond to God's world, to the signs of the times. Again, if we think about that muscle, we're strengthening the muscle for something, not simply because we're told we should, but because we're after something. We have something we're chasing. Ignatian contemplation, there's a great quote from Father Walter Burghardt, Jesuit priest, right? He says, Ignatian contemplation is taking a long, loving look at the real. And it's kind of a existential quote. But if you get to it, right, it's a challenge. Taking a long, loving look at the real means not shying away from what we see in the world. Those stories from Rice Bowl, those stories from the news right now, as we look at the crisis in Ukraine or any number of other things, really, being present to those needs, being present to what's happening and sticking with it. It doesn't have to be negative. It can also be positive. Spending time contemplating, the beauty of a flower or your kids, your cat. We look at the needs of the world. We look at the moment we're in, so that we can respond, right? So we can act. We contemplate so we can act. There's always a both and at work here. There's a setting aside of the self in part and making room for another. I'll tell you a story. I was in Jordan just before the pandemic fell upon the world, shut everything down. And I'd gone to visit the Jesuits there and to learn a little bit about the work that they were doing. It did a lot of great work with kind of refugee ministering to refugees. There's a great refugee community there from a lot of folks from Somalia and Sudan and others. And I'd gone, right, I had my backpack and that was it because none of my luggage arrived. I'll get some videos and all will be well. And I get there and Father Rob, great guy, Jesuit priest who was there. He says, "All right, Eric, I got you set up. Tomorrow night there are some refugees who will come. You can ask them your questions." I said, "Great. How many are coming?" He's like, "Well, he's counting on his fingers. I advertised here, I advertised there." He's like, "About 50. I was like, 50 people. I was like, my batteries are still somewhere over the ocean. Like, I don't even know if I can power the lights that long. So I'm like talking batteries. I'm thinking about like, again, I didn't have a tripod, like all these things I'm calculating 50, if I'm with 50 people, 50 stories, like what's the lowest number of minutes you need to hear a story from a refugee? Terrible questions, right? Terrible questions. And I remember walking into the room, all these refugees are gathered there, excited, because it's a community. It's a community of people that have found one another and are passionate and care about, the work that they're doing. And I was like, I can't limit the stories here. And so I sat, it was like 3 hours of the individuals just kind of coming through and sitting in front of the camera and sharing these, incredibly powerful, heart-wrenching stories of flight and of death and of just unspeakable things. And it really put it in context for me. I was worried about my batteries running out, and here these folks are, sharing these important stories. And I think when it comes to fasting, how's this connect to fasting, right? It's what you're thinking, right? There was a part of me that was getting in the way. There was a part of me that I was not letting go of. I wasn't making room for the other. I wasn't, I love, again, that passage from Philippians, God empties and God's self to come in and take human form. And that's what we're called to do too. That's what fasting is asking of us, that making room for another, and to engage in relationship. It's tempting to feel hopeless, though, particularly in that scenario where I was sitting there with the camera and thinking, what am I going to do? I can make videos, and that's about it. But again, I think something else about fasting that makes us free is that it's not just about absorbing the pain and suffering of others. It's about building up these relationships for something. There's a something more, there's a vision that we're called to enter into, and a unique role that we're called to take on, right? So if we're emptying ourselves, if we're setting things aside so that we're more free to engage in relationships, what next? So I'm struck again from my time at Catholic Relief Services. There's a book by Henry Nouwen. I think it's on the next slide here. Let's see. There it is. It's a great book, very short book. I think it's just from maybe some words he shared at some point about fundraising. Fundraising was always on our mind at CRS. CRS is a nonprofit. That's a normal thing for nonprofits to be thinking about. Rice Bowl certainly played its part. Fasting and almsgiving are kind of the spiritual words we might use for fundraising, to be very kind of cavalier with phrases here. But I think when we think about it, we're not tricking people right into giving us their money. We're not guilting people into donations or hitting them with scripture in the hopes that they figure out and come around to our way of seeing things. Nouwen writes, fundraising is proclaiming what we believe in such a way that we offer other people an opportunity to participate with us in our vision and mission. It's about vision, it's about mission. And again, fundraising is not synonymous with fasting. So don't quote me on that. There's different things, but there's some similarities there that I think are helpful when we think about this idea, this opportunity to embrace a vision, embrace a mission. That fasting for what? There is a sense of giving something up, of sacrifice, of pushing down my wants in favor of the wants of another. That's something that fundraising and fasting have in common. But we're so used to thinking of these things in these negative terms. What if we embrace this positive vision? And again, I'm not asking for money, so don't worry. I mean, maybe Kate or Brenna want to, but I'm not. What if we looked at these things, right, as this opportunity to encounter God and God's people and God's creation in a new way? And that was the goal of our fasting, to be free to serve God's world in the way that only we can, right? And I think there's that recognition that we bring something unique and valuable as people, as human beings, utterly unique in our stuff. We're invited to participate in this mission of God's. So I want to share another story, and I promise to keep it on fasting. I was recently in Spain on an Ignatian pilgrimage. We came to the cave at Manresa. So if you're up to date with your Ignatian lore, you know that St. Ignatius went to this cave, supposedly, and there he encounters God, right? He had this great moment at Montserrat. He lays down his sword in front of Our Lady of Montserrat and pledges his life to the work of God, to be God's knight. And he goes to this cave, and that's where he's experiencing God and working on the spiritual exercises. But in this cave that Ignatius really begins to wrestle with, oh geez, like this is a lot of work, this vocation that I've embraced. This is gonna be tough. And he's tempted, right? He's tempted. He suffers. Ignatius has suffered from scrupulosity, so he's always thinking about, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? And it kind of manifests itself in this obsession with his past sins, with a need to atone, need to confess. He's convinced he's never able to do enough for God, that God can never really forgive him. He doubts, can good really triumph over evil? He lets his hair grow long. He wears sackcloth. He doesn't cut his nails. He doesn't clean himself, and he contemplates suicide. He allows what he's feeling internally to manifest itself externally. This sense of I'm not good enough. I can never be good enough. I can never live up to what God has invited me to. And of course, that's a lie, right? That's a lie. God loves us. God delights in us as we are. And Ignatius comes to that realization. But it takes some time. And he looks the part of someone who's fasting, right? In our traditional mind of fasting, he looks the part of 30 lashes and he's malnourished and he's beating himself up, but he's not free, right? He's not free. That kind of fasting confines him. It makes the lens really tight. It shortens his gaze. He's held captive by these demons. And he's afraid that he's not up to the task. So we were there, as I said, and Father Kevin Burke, maybe you know him if you're involved with Regis University, great, wonderful Jesuit. He's part of our group, right? He's saying Mass when we're this is the picture of the cave here. He's saying Mass the first day there, and he says many things, but the thing that stuck in my mind was, he says, the best thing Ignatius did for God in that place was cut his fingernails and wash his hair. And I love that, right? Because that's he's able to then move on to be the person God's inviting him to be. He's not stuck on this idea of I have to, hate myself and punish myself and give up stuff just to give up stuff. To look the part, he's able to then recognize, oh no, I have something to do. I have a contribution to give, and I need to be about that business. That's the freedom, right? Fasting and penance don't need to look like, fasting and penance are important, right? That's not the message that they're not important. Fasting and penance are important, but they don't need to look like a scene from the Passion of the Christ. They shouldn't look like that scene at all. They should let the scene I like, and again, Father Burke and Dr. Burke Sullivan of Creighton use the fellowship of the ring as the image, that kind of all of the fellowship gathering. You have my sword, you have my axe, if you're familiar with the movie, right? This idea of community coming together and giving something up for the vision. Setting something of themselves aside to be a part of something greater. And in so doing, this is key, right? In so doing, there's a necessary acceptance of limitations, of parameters. If I'm going to give of myself to this, I can't give of myself to that. If I'm going to empty myself for Y, then I might not be called to do X. And I think, we're so, we want to be generalists, we want to be good at everything, certainly, right? But we can't be. And that's part of this fasting journey. It's part of the freedom that we want to find. We want to go deeper into who we are so we can flourish as human beings. I think about, I'll give you a picture of my kids here. I think about when I was a young father with fewer gray hair. Eliana, my oldest, we were sitting out on the porch, and she's very young to me, like a couple months old or whatever. And I'm sitting there kind of drinking a beer and thinking, man, like, my nights are no longer like going to meetings, going to book clubs, going out for drinks, meeting with friends, going to parties. I am here in this place with this kid, maybe sipping a beer and looking at the world go by. And that was a realization of my vocation. Things had changed. There's a deepening of one option and a letting go of others. And again, that idea of letting go. And now I'm more free to be a father, to be who I can be in this relationship. Give another image. This is my new cat, Sebastian. But the point of the picture is not the cat. The point of the picture is the focus on the cat, right? We think about this as when you have an image, you can have an image and everything can be in focus, right? You have I think a shallow depth of field, or the other opposite. Obviously, I'm not a good photographer, but this idea that you can focus on one thing and you can really see it and engage with it, or you can look at everything and nothing stands out, right? And I think some of the most powerful images draw our eye to somewhere in particular, and that's really what our fasting can do for us, to help us let go of some things and to be who God is calling us to be as a unique person, not someone else, me now, and then we're able to engage with other people. So, and I think I want to give you a couple things to think about, right, as we do that, because I think about my time again at CRS and a time with the refugee community in Jordan. I couldn't be all things to these people. I couldn't negotiate a great peace deal or solve food insecurity. That wasn't what I was called to do. Though, man, wouldn't that have been awesome? I was called to use, whatever handful of gifts I have in a deepening way to be available for these folks that I encounter, right? So let me give you some things, ways to fast for freedom, fast toward freedom. The first thing is Ignatian contemplation, right? Take a long, loving look loving hard look at the real. See how it moves you. I think about the war again in Ukraine and how haunting the images are, how devastating the news. But why do I feel that way, right? How does it move me? And what does it ask me to do here? It doesn't necessarily ask me to rush to Ukraine, but it might ask me to pay closer attention to something in my intimate life here, relationships, choices I make. We're all connected, right? So what we do here matters to there, even if I can't be immediately helpful to people in Ukraine. What choices can I make, in response to that desire that I feel? And what do I need to let go of? What images of myself do I need to let go of? I invite you to consider your relationships, right? As well, that idea of fasting should bring us into relationships, should make us freer for relationship. What am I holding too tightly to? What am I not allowing myself to let go of that's getting in the way of my relationship with self, with God, with neighbor, with creation? And finally, cut your fingernails, right? Cut your fingernails, comb your hair, take a shower. Fasting is an opportunity to invite others into the work of the gospel, of building up God's dream for our world, right? It's an exciting thing. Are you being a downer about it? If you're being a downer, you're not doing a great job. You got to be joyful. I think that's key. And I think it's tempting to say, oh, I got long fingernails and unruly hair. I look the part. I'm doing it. Not so. One more thing I'll say, and this is a shameless plug. If you were on early, you saw me hold the book up. But it's not just a plug for my book, right? I wrote this book, and you can see it there, and you're welcome to investigate it more if you're interested. But in the process, it was a writing process, coming face to face with my story, and you kind of uncomfortably so, in places where I tried to be all things to all people and fell short, and ended up being nothing to no one, right? So what I invite you to do during Lent is to spend some time writing. I did last Lent. Part of my own Lenten journey last year was The Artist's Way, which maybe you're familiar with. It's a really great kind of workshop retreat, kind of a secular kind of thing, but it invites you to engage with your creativity, and do it with some friends, do it alone. It's a great resource. But one of the foundational elements of that retreat is every day you write 3 pages, called the Artist's Pages or something like that. 3 pages nonstop, whatever size notebook you're working with, 3 pages nonstop. And then you get to the end of the 3rd page and you stop. It's a stream of consciousness exercise. And what that does is it drains you of all the stuff in your mind, all the stuff, the ideas, the stories, the worries, the shopping notes, whatever it is, it puts it on the page. And you're able then to free up that space to be available to other people, to the needs of others, and to whoever might be, asking you to do something in their lives. It also helps you to put parameters around, right? And say, hey, I don't need to worry about grocery shopping right now. I can focus on being present to my morning coffee, right? Whatever that might be. It's a really great exercise. I encourage you to do it. I could feel the difference when I did, and I can feel the difference when I no longer do. So it's part of that process of writing your story, which again is what the book's about: telling your story, deepening your faith. But the idea of putting your story down, the nitty gritty, the details is really helpful. And with that, I will stop and turn it over to Brenna.
Thanks, Eric. That was lovely. And as we get started, I will just share that Eric and I, obviously, if you were on at the beginning, we didn't know that folks could hear us, but we're good friends. And so we had prepared for this together. As any good Ignatian experience, and also there's a huge thunderstorm in Cleveland right now. So if I freeze or disappear, wave your hands at me. Okay. So in good Ignatian tradition, there will be a little repetition, but I think it will all make sense in the end. So again, I think I was invited, I work at the Ignatian Solidarity Network to kind of make this feel practical, and to provide some practical examples of what this could look like through the ecological lens, which is the way that I proceed with most of the work that I do at ISN. And so I thought it would be really nice to start with this poem where actually Eric's colleague Meg is going to be leading an eco poetry retreat with some ISN members at the beginning of May. And I came across this poem today And it just fits so perfectly with this theme. And it's called Primary Wonder by Denise Levertov. Days pass when I forget the mystery. Problems insoluble and problems offering their own ignored solutions jostle for my attention. They crowd its antechamber, along with a host of diversions, my courtiers wearing their colored clothes, cap and bells. And then, once more, the quiet mystery is present to me. The throng's clamor recedes. The mystery that there is anything at all, let alone cosmos, joy, memory, everything rather than void. And that, O Lord, Creator, hallowed one, you still, hour by hour, sustain it. And so I think that poem says it all in a lot of ways for me, which is, what is the it? What is the point of our lives, or going back to St. Ignatius, the first principle and foundation, right? And it's to really hold that mystery, to hold that love that sustains us, and to be able to return to that. And so whatever is getting in the way of that, those clamors, the clothing, the clutter is what I call it. I've been on a big decluttering kick in my own life. And I think, like Eric, actually, I was writing notes as you were talking, right? You were talking about the focus, and it's the same with clutter. When you have a lot of clutter around you, you can't actually see what you have. And so I think that, again, this poem is about that focus, or that narrowing in, that we're invited to do through our fasting. So as I said before, I will get practical, but Eric and I are both Ignatian spirituality nerds. So I'm just going to make like 3 quick points, and then I'm going to like really give you practical things that we've done at ISN for carbon fasting. But Eric and I were talking about this concept of limits. And so the 3 points that I'm going to make really quick are that limits can promote intergenerational solidarity. They can provide a means of liberation, and they can help us live the magis and our own vocations. So to begin, this is a picture of redwood trees. I just went to California for the first time, and like anybody that I met there can tell you that I was very excited about seeing redwood trees. And this, I'm using this image to kind of represent the creation story, because I think that in our ecological environmental work and in our faith life is where a lot of things begin. And when I was in my spiritual direction training at John Carroll University, our professor, Joan Newth, she had us read the creation story, and she was like, tell me exactly what happened. Don't just like say the story that we all think about creation. And so we got to this point where it was like, why did Eve eat the fruit? Well, it looked good, right? That she didn't have this like evil intention. She was like, oh, this does look like good fruit to eat. Why not? And so what I always go back to with the creation story is really limits, right? And the spiritual truth that like, as humans, we don't know our own limits. We want what we can't have. We had the whole garden. We had everything that we could possibly want. There was great abundance. And what did we decide to do? We tried to get the one thing that we couldn't have. And so I see that playing out again and again, right? In our kind of creation, our current creation story, right? Humans, we keep going beyond our limits, our ecological limits. And we see the degradation that has on our own lives, and also, in our community and between species. And so as we continue to think about this, I really was like excited about this positive framing of fasting, and also learned this really cool thing about redwood trees. So sorry if people already know this, but a friend taught me that redwood circles, so a circle of redwood trees actually usually form around a dead old growth redwood tree. So you can see in the picture on the left, there's kind of this old stump that's there. And so that is the older tree that has already died. And they have like these interconnections and intersections, like their trunks kind of connect underground. It's the roots, but it's also kind of like this trunk system. And so On the right, you can see that's a baby redwood tree that's growing around a big one, right? And so the reason that the baby trees are able to grow is because of the nutrients from that old stump. That's the only way that they're able to grow to the heights that they grow. And so I think that as we're thinking about this, this sense of mutual flourishing, right, through fasting, or abundance through fasting, I just always find images from nature so resonant for this, right? So we stand on the shoulders of giants, and like Eric said, as we are able to kind of become less and less, or just make more space, right, then we're able to share that love and provide that communal flourishing. Intergenerational solidarity is very central in this. And as we think specifically about like climate fasting and climate change. So I just read this book. It's going to be on the next slide. I'm nerding out about it. Eric can tell you. It's called Time Management for Mortals. And it's all about the main premise of the book is like our lives are really short. And he just like keeps telling us that. And like, so we really have to like figure out what we're going to do with them. And so it's again, that like beauty of limits. And so an image that he uses, it's not his own. He takes it from a philosopher, but it's just one that I can't stop thinking about, is he talks about the idea that if we imagine in every single generation of human history, there's at least one human who makes it to be 100 years old, right? So we've got somebody who's made it to 100 years. Even in the Middle Ages, we've got the anomaly. If we line up those lives back to back, it only takes 35 human lives, 100-year-old human lives, to get back to ancient Egypt and the time of the pharaohs. It's only 20 100-year human lives to get back to the time of Jesus. And we're only 7 100-year lives from the Renaissance, right? And so I think that is just so impactful for me, especially as I think about like intergenerational solidarity and climate change, right? We can think, so if one of us makes it to 2100, probably no one here, right? It's only going to take 9 other people, maybe you, Eric, you are blessed. It's only going to take 9 other people to get to the year 3000, right? So as we think about like these predictions with the climate change reports, right? Like the end of the century is like, oh, I'll be dead. Like, who cares, right? But we can really see, right, that our lives are deeply interconnected. And we can also think about this in terms of like interspecies solidarity as well. And so I think that what is really important as we're thinking about like fasting and who comes after us is how this does tie into Magis, our vocation, and discernment, right? And so as I mentioned, this book by Oliver Burkeman, I highly recommend it. The average human life is 4,000 weeks. So that's what the first part of the title means. So just sorry for sharing that fact if it wrinkles your brain, but I think it's good. And I just really appreciate this quote from him, which says, once you truly understand that you're guaranteed to miss out on almost every experience the world has to offer, because our human lives are so short, the fact that there are so many you still haven't experienced stops feeling like a problem. Instead, you get to focus on the tiny slice of experience you actually do have time for. And the freer you are to choose in each moment what counts most. And so Oliver Burkeman is not into Ignatian spirituality, but when I read that, I was like, this is St. Ignatius. It's about interior freedom. It's about discernment. It's about the Magis and going deeper instead of trying to just kind of, when we think about how much is enough and limits, sometimes we're even greedily collecting experiences. And so I think that when we can kind of enter into this mentality, especially as we think about these large global problems, right? So the war in Ukraine, climate change, migration, right? At ISN, we racism, we work with all of these issues. And I just feel like a lot of people often express anxiety and overwhelm. And I agree, because it is overwhelming. And so I think that when we are able to kind of understand the global, but then really bring it down to a local action, what is the thing that I can do here and now that actually empowers us, right? It actually, the limits give us freedom to do what we can do, and to maybe experience personal or ecological conversion. And I just think about, for example, the life of Jesus Christ. It was so based where he was, right? There's the Roman Empire, there's all of these things happening in the world, and like Jesus didn't wake up and check his phone and see like all of the global, news updates. But I do think that, right, like he was kind of like Eric was saying, he was very relational, very very based exactly where he was. And so I think that we can take a lot from that as we're continuing this journey toward a fasting and of working for justice and of kind of going deeper with the Majus. And so, I guess the kind of churchy way that I would say what Oliver Berkman is saying is, right, the quote or the part of the prayer attributed to Saint Oscar Romero: we can't do everything. And there's a sense of liberation in realizing that, because it allows us to do something and to do it very well. And I just think again and again about that even the title of that prayer, and again, that sense of intergenerational solidarity. And, Brian Massingale talks about us being in a relay race, right? So I'm not going to make it to the finish line, right? That's not my piece of the work. And the people who came before me also did not. But what can I do to help future generations? And I also just really appreciate this quote from Pope Francis, just about this sense of, I find that during Lent, it does feel like this kind of awakening from dormancy in a way, right? Of like, how am I going to begin to open up and become more free to act? And so an example that I wanted to share is one year for Lent, I tried not to use my car, and very different than having a child. So not trying to compare myself to you, Eric, right? But like, in that limiting factor, I had to say no to a lot of things. I couldn't go to a meeting on the other side of town if I couldn't get there by public transit or by bike, right? And in that simplifying, in that focusing in, there was actually a lot of freedom, because I was like before the pandemic, I'm trying to like rush around and do everything and couldn't really be present to the people that I was with. So I think that this is our call. And the final thing that I'll say kind of about the Majus is, I think sometimes we think of it like, or the way we enter into fasting is kind of like Ignatius, right? With like the being really scrupulous, right? Like, oh, well, I'm going to give up chocolate and I'm going to wake up at 5 a.m. and, say the rosary and and it just gets like a little extreme. And it's like, the second week of the exercises, where the word Majus comes from, is all about falling in love with Christ so that we completely reorient our lives, right? Like the Pedro Rupe, fall in love, stay in love. How can we make space so that God's grace can come in and kind of reorient our lives in ways that we can't even force ourselves to do, much like the story of Saint Ignatius. So this is where things will get a little more practical. So a couple of the campaigns that we have done at ISN, I will talk more in depth, but we've done a food waste fast. And then we also, not during Lent, but during Advent, we do simple Advent, abundant life. And I think that has kind of a similar flavor in terms of fasting, right? Like, how can making space actually be this way of providing deep abundance and deep life? And so I've written some reflections for Earth Beat. So there's lots of kind of spiritual material out there kind of on this theme. But I think that the other thing that I wanted to say here is Margaret Silf did a presentation for Contemplative Leaders in Action earlier this year, maybe in the fall. And she talked about consolation and desolation in a way I'd never heard it. And she used this idea of resonance and dissonance. So like, what resonates most deeply with my life and my relationship with God and who I know God to be and my vocation, and what feels dissonant. And so I think that that's also just a really helpful way to think about kind of this idea of fasting in Lent. How can I live a life that is most resonant with what God's deepest desire for my life, with what God imagines for me that I can't even imagine, in in the way that Ignatius had his nails cut. And then, sorry, this is actually the last kind of theoretical piece of things. And that's just that I was in Yosemite when I was in California. I don't fly a lot. So when I was out there for work, I was like, I'm going to do everything in one kind of trip. And so I got to go to Yosemite. I'd never seen mountains like that. And, just as I was hiking around, they have lots of signage that talks about the millions of years that it took to form this place. And when we think a lot about in ecological circles, people will talk about deep time. And even in our faith, right, there's kind of this new cosmology thinking about, from the beginning of the universe to now. And so I just share this image just as kind of a reminder of our smallness in the timeline of history, and in a really positive way, in a really abundant, life-giving way, right? In the way that Eric and I have been saying over and over and over, because of the limits that provide us the freedom to really figure out what is my unique piece of this work to do, to contribute. And so this is just a quote that we used from Pope Francis as we started our plastic fast in 2019. So this is the first campaign that I'll talk about. But I think that this idea of kind of suffering for love, or, I would say really guilt language doesn't resonate as much with my generation, but like this opportunity to sacrifice in a way that provides deep transformation for myself and for those around me. So in 2019, we did a fast from single-use plastics. And again, that might seem like a small thing, but we really invited people, we gave people practical information about like ways that they could do this and ideas to cut plastics out, and kind of, could you make your own toothpaste? Like all of these ways, big and small. But I think that I just want to uplift again kind of this interconnected nature of fasting. One of the reasons that we did this is the environmental and health impacts of plastics, right? So when we think about plastics are made out of oil, so how are the communities where the oil is being extracted being treated? How are their health outcomes? We know that usually both of those things are not good. We know that in Cancer Alley, where a lot of our oil gets refined into plastics and other items, there are high rates of cancer and lower life expectancy. And that usually low income communities and people of color are most directly impacted. And then finally, as we think about where are these products sold, how are the workers being treated, and kind of the whole workers' right element of this. So it seems like, oh, why would okay, like what's the big deal of giving up a bottle of water for Lent? But I think that, again, with the Magis, if we can look deeper at that bottle of water and see all of the interconnections and all of the ways that our lives are interconnected with other humans and with creation, in that practice, it can actually be a deep moment for conversion. And so this was just kind of a little kind of description of why we were inviting people to fast from plastics. Yeah, and also as we think about future generations and kind of microplastics in the ocean, the animals, all of those things. In 2020, actually, as the pandemic happened, we were doing a Lenten food waste fast. And it was very interesting because I was telling people, oh, try not to overbuy food, right? And that's when all of like the food shortages were happening. So it was actually like a really interesting moment because the pandemic was kicking off and hoarding was starting to happen, but we had some people who were able to like look in their cabinets and be like, oh, actually I have so much food, I have so much abundance, kind of that clutter thing of like I've just like haven't seen it, and I've been able to make a week's worth of meals from just using what I already had. So kind of that loaves and fishes moment in a way with the food waste fast. And some of the, there are really strong statistics for why we should fast from food waste. Some stats say, approximately 40% of emissions come from food, or not 40% of emissions, approximately 40% of the food grown in the United States ends up getting thrown away. And that about 8% of emissions are food related. So we felt like this was an interesting kind of way to invite people to fasting, because you have control over your diet and you have control over food waste. Like I can't control toxic sludge or, what the 100 most polluting companies are doing, but I can choose what I eat and how I eat it. And also there is a structural element to this. I can, opt out of factory farmed meat and things like that. So we found that this was a really bountiful way to invite people into fasting. The last thing that I'll say, and I can't even see the time, so sorry, is that currently this year we are not doing a fast per se during Lent, but what we have decided to do this year is Laudato Si Lent. And this was related to the Laudato Si action platform that Pope Francis has recently released. So Pope Francis has invited everybody in the church to, so from families to religious communities, to schools, to universities, to organizations like ISN, to make an action plan, to make an environmental action plan that addresses 7 goals from the Laudato Si action platform. So anywhere from hearing the cry of the earth, to hearing the cry of the poor, to simple living, to ecological economics and how do we change our economic system. So it's vast and wonderful, and I will talk to you forever about it if you are interested in finding out more. But this year we invited people to start thinking about, okay, in my community, like, can we start having conversations about how we might live out this action plan collectively? Could we start talking about, how are we responding to the cry of the earth at our parish? What could we do? What changes could we make? And so it's kind of a transition a little bit more into like a structural or collective fasting, but still at a very local level. And so I think that is also kind of an element of fasting that I enjoy, is kind of this accountability piece. I was a Jesuit volunteer, right? And we had a stipend that year, and that was very limiting. But I think I've never lived so good as I did, crammed in a tiny house with 7 other people, because I had accountability partners and people who were going through the fast with me. And that I think that sometimes we lose that collective element of fasting. And so Laudato Si Lent is just a way to invite people to think about how can we do this as a community, and not just during Lent, kind of moving forward. The final thing that and then this is just a sample. We made a parish and religious communities guide with, just all of the goals, some reflection questions, a prayer, and really concrete, like easy, medium, hard actions that you could take if you wanted to try to implement this in your community. So I'll put the link to that in the chat in case anyone's interested. So to end, I did just want to share another poem that is close to my heart. And I think it, again, speaks to this abundance in simplicity and in going back to nature. And so this is called The Peace of Wild Things by Wendell Berry. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. And so I wish for you in your fasting that ability to rest in the grace of the world and feel freedom, and to feel kind of the spaciousness and abundance that that fasting can provide. So thank you.
Thank you, Brenna and Eric. How wonderful. We have about 10 minutes left. If you are interested or have a comment or a question, please feel free to put them into the Q&A. And I know Brenna and Eric will be happy to answer them. And maybe we can, I'll be happy to start. I think one of the things, I'll be honest, when I first heard your title, Eric, was fasting towards freedom. And I'm like, okay, and I think it's really remarkable the way that both of you tied fasting into opening your hearts and minds more. So Do you all have recommendations for readings or prayers that kind of give us this new perspective? Oh, I know.
I honestly, I think the book Brenna has described is the one I need to buy a copy of. Brenna, you want to say anything more about that? Because that just seems like spot on.
Yeah, it's so again, it's called Time Management for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman. And it's not a religious book, but just he does bring in religious tradition quite a bit. And I think, I think fasting also helps us get a little perspective on our lives, right? Sometimes we're like so in it. And so I think that it's just kind of pulled me out of myself and made me realize like, oh, like what I'm doing is important. And also my life is a blip on the map. So like, maybe don't take myself so seriously. And like you said, Eric, like experience joy in this work and in this lifetime instead of that like scrupulosity. I don't know if that's a word, that Ignatius experienced.
Great.
Yeah. I think like any sort of reflection on Ignatian difference and Ignatian freedom, like those, like if you put that in the old search engine, I think anything like on that can really help kind of add different layers to fasting. I mean, like, right, Lenten fasting is for Lent, right? But I mean, the lifestyle can really be, as I think Brandon really pointed to, good year round. So I think as you kind of like reflect on what it means to be indifferent can be really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Amy made a comment that I think that you could both respond to. She said the idea of cut your fingernails makes me think of Jesus saying, don't stand on the corner in sackcloth and ashes to impress other people.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's spot on. I think that's exactly the right thing. And I think one of the things this makes me think of, like, we're in the Ignatian year, right? And it's tempting to think the Ignatian year is about Saint Ignatius, but Saint Ignatius, and I know Father Arturo Sosa, the Father General, has been keen on, like, this is about Jesus. Like, we're pointing towards Jesus. And so I think that observation is spot on, because, like, yeah, like, we're not making it up. Like, it's not new stuff. Ignatius didn't make it up. This, like, Jesus himself was living this. That's what our faith is built on, right? That life of grace. So yeah, absolutely.
And I think, like, from my experience at in contemplative prayer, or like maybe this is another book suggestion, Father James Martin's Between Heaven and Mirth, right? Like, Jesus was funny. Like, Jesus, I don't think that he would have had a lot of followers if he was, like, doom and gloom all the time. Like, obviously he said some hard things. It was not easy to follow Jesus, but I think, right, like, if we think about, yeah, like, Jesus was joyful, and that's what started this whole movement.
Yeah, showed his humanity. Yeah, great. Anybody else have any other question before we roll? No, I think we're good. Yeah. Well, thanks so much, you two. It was wonderful being with you. Oh yeah.
I did make a little thing, so if anyone wants to get out there.
Brenna, great job.
Yeah, I'm all
like
for fasting, but I think it's always good to read books.
I'm afraid of it's a question. Oh, just a thank you from Amy as well. That thanks to both of you for coming on and giving us your Wednesday evening in order to really talk about and give us some really fresh, great thoughts about fasting. I really appreciate. I know for myself, I really appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing both of you online and in all your writings and on nationsolidarity.net, which I'm saying, like, we always just, you all amaze us both at the conference and at ISN. So thank you again, and good night to everybody who joined us.